The waiting room felt colder than it should have. Jack sat on the edge of the hard plastic chair, his hands trembling slightly, fingers brushing against the worn fabric of his jeans. The fluorescent lights above hummed a quiet, almost eerie tune, their relentless buzz making his heart race even faster. He hadn't been able to sleep the night before, his mind running through 100 worst-case scenarios. But now, it was all just waiting for results, waiting for news that could change everything. His son, Leo, had stayed with his grandmother last night. Jack had promised he'd be back soon, just a quick checkup, and then they'd go home to their small apartment. But the promise had turned into hours of endless sitting and silent hope, interrupted only by the occasional shuffle of someone else in the waiting room, people who came and went with their own anxieties, their own fears. He thought about Leo, about how he had woken up at 6 a.m. that morning to find his son sitting on the edge of his bed, his small face tired but hopeful. "We be back for dinner, Dad?" Leo had asked, his voice unsure but filled with an innocence that broke Jack's heart. "I'll be back, buddy. I promise," Jack had told him, despite not knowing for certain. He had promised Leo that everything would be fine. But the reality of the doctor's visit was harder than he had expected. The silence in the room pressed against him, and he couldn't help but wonder if he'd have to break that promise. Jack ran a hand through his unruly hair, feeling the weight of the world on his shoulders. His thoughts wandered to the bills piling up on the kitchen table, the calls from creditors he had been avoiding, and the uncertainty that plagued every waking moment. But most of all, his mind kept returning to the test results, the biopsy results that could confirm what he had feared for months. The doctors hadn't said it outright, but the signs were there: the unexplained weight loss, the persistent fatigue, the night sweats. And then there was the cough that wouldn't go away, no matter how much he tried to ignore it. He took a deep breath, trying to calm himself, but it was no use. The uncertainty gripped him too tightly. It was then that he heard a voice. "Excuse me, are you all right?" Jack looked up to find a woman standing in front of him, her eyes full of concern. She was tall, wearing a sharp black blazer that suggested she didn't belong here, not in a waiting room like this. She seemed out of place, like someone who had walked in from another world entirely, one where doctors' waiting rooms were just another stop on a busy schedule, not a place where lives were uncertain. She was strikingly beautiful, her dark hair pulled into a sleek bun, her makeup flawless, but it was the look in her eyes that caught him off guard. There was a quiet intensity there, something that made Jack pause and wonder if she had noticed the same sense of hopelessness he felt. Yeah, I'm fine," Jack muttered, straightening his posture and forcing a half smile. "Just waiting." She didn't smile back, though her gaze softened as she studied him for a moment longer than was typical. "I can't help but notice you're alone," she said, her voice quiet, almost hesitant yet confident. "I'm Sophie," she added, offering a hand that Jack shook a bit stiffly. "I'm Jack," he replied, feeling awkward for the first time in years. "I know this sounds strange," Sophie continued, leaning in slightly as if sharing a secret, "but I need someone to help me out with something. And, you look like you could use a break." Jack raised an eyebrow, unsure of what to make of her sudden offer. "What do you mean?" he asked, the questions forming faster than he could process them. "I need you to pretend to be my boyfriend," she said quickly, before he could interrupt. Her words were blunt, shocking even. Jack blinked at her in disbelief, unsure whether he had heard her right. "Excuse me?" he said, his heart pounding now for a completely different reason. Sophie looked around, as though checking for eavesdroppers. "I'll explain everything, but the short version is this. I'm a CEO. I have a very public image to maintain, and I'm being pressured to show that I'm, well, in a relationship, but it's all a lie. I don't need anything serious. I just need someone to play the role for a few days." Jack sat back in his chair, his mind racing. Was this woman crazy? Or was he just losing it from the stress? But Sophie's eyes met his again, and there was something in them, something raw and urgent, that made him hesitate. "You need this, don't you?" she asked, her voice softening for the first time. You're not here just for a checkup. You're waiting for something far more important. And you're alone, just like me. So, what do you say? Jack didn't know what to say, but in that moment, with everything else swirling around him, he realized he had nothing to lose. Before we continue the story, drop a comment telling me how you liked it, where you're watching from, and give this story a rating out of 10. If you're enjoying the content, don't forget to subscribe so you never miss the best stories. Jack's mind raced, unable to grasp what was happening. He was sitting in a sterile waiting room, on the brink of hearing life-changing news, and a stranger had just asked him to pretend to be her boyfriend. The absurdity of it all hit him like a punch to the stomach. He glanced down at his hands, still trembling, the weight of everything pressing on him. He had a son to take care of, a future that seemed too uncertain to even imagine, and now this woman was offering him a way out. Not out of his problems, no, just out of the solitude that had been consuming him for so long. "I'm not sure I understand," Jack said, his voice low. "Why me? Why ask me?" Sophie took a seat next to him, her presence unexpectedly calming. She wasn't the kind of person you'd expect to find in a place like this, an expensive suit and flawless makeup standing out among the worn-out chairs and the sickly fluorescent lights. Yet there she was, as real as any other person in that room. "I know it sounds strange," Sophie began, leaning forward with an intensity that grabbed his attention. "But you look, well, I don't know how to put this, but you seem like you need something more than just medical results, something that could distract you for a while. And maybe I'm just looking for a distraction too." Jack stared at her, still trying to make sense of her offer. His head was filled with questions. What did she want from him? Why did she pick him out of the countless others in the room? But beneath all of it, there was something about her honesty, her openness, that pulled him in. The desperation in her voice felt real. I'm not the guy you want for this," Jack said slowly, his mind trying to piece together the puzzle she was presenting. I'm not what you need." For Sophie's gaze softened, and for a brief moment, Jack saw something familiar in her eyes. Vulnerability. "I know. But that's the point. I don't need a perfect boyfriend. I need someone real, someone who won't make me feel more fake than I already do." Jack swallowed hard, the weight of her words settling deep in his chest. Sophie was rich. She was a CEO, the kind of woman who probably had everything at her fingertips, and yet here she was, asking him for something as simple and strange as pretending to be in a relationship. The irony wasn't lost on him. But at that moment, he couldn't deny that he understood her more than he wanted to. He thought about Leo again, his son's innocent face, full of hope. He was supposed to be the strong one. He was supposed to be the one who had it together. But here he was, sitting across from a woman who was asking him for help, when he was the one who needed help more than anyone could imagine. "Why don't you just find someone else?" Jack asked, the question slipping out before he could stop it. Sophie let out a short laugh, but there was no humor in it. "I've tried," she said, shaking her head, "but everyone I know is either too caught up in my world or too caught up in their own. I just need someone who doesn't want anything from me, someone who won't judge me for the mess I've created." There was a long pause between them, the hum of the lights above seeming to grow louder. Jack felt the weight of the moment pressing down on him, like the air was too thick to breathe. "I'll pay you," Sophie added, almost as an afterthought, her voice softer now. "Not much, but something for your time. I just need this to work." For Jack didn't know why, but the offer of money felt almost secondary. It wasn't the kind of thing that would fix his problems, but maybe, just maybe, it could give him a temporary escape. Something to keep him from drowning in the uncertainty of his life. He exhaled, rubbing his eyes as he tried to clear the fog from his mind. "All right," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'll do it. But only for a few days, okay? I can't keep up a lie for long." Sophie's face brightened, relief washing over her like a wave. "Thank you," she said, her tone genuine. "You don't know how much this means to me." Jack didn't know why he agreed, but as he stood up and walked with Sophie toward the door, He couldn't shake the feeling that this strange, ridiculous deal might just change both of their lives in ways they hadn't expected. Before we continue the story, drop a comment telling me how you liked it, where you're watching from, and give this story a rating out of 10. If you're enjoying the content, don't forget to subscribe so you never miss the best stories. The first few days felt like a blur. Jack's life, already a jumble of uncertainty and stress, had taken an unexpected turn. Sophie had made it clear from the start, this wasn't going to be easy. She had a public image to protect, and Jack was now part of that image. He was supposed to play the role of her boyfriend, someone who could appear loving and engaged, even though neither of them truly knew what they were doing. At first, it felt like a game, one he couldn't quite understand. He wasn't used to the high-end dinners Sophie arranged for their dates, or the photos she insisted on taking, pretending for the cameras that they were a happy couple. The first time they stepped into a luxurious restaurant together, Jack had felt like he was living someone else's life. The polished staff, the extravagant menu, the way people looked at them as if they were something important. It all made him feel like a fraud. But Sophie played her part flawlessly, always smiling, always confident. Her demeanor was perfect for the role she needed him to play. As they sat at the table, she was charming and poised, completely at ease. Jack, on the other hand, was awkward, unsure of how to act, feeling out of place in a world where people dressed to the nines and sipped champagne like it was water. He caught his reflection in a nearby mirror and barely recognized himself. He looked too ordinary, too out of place. Yet, Sophie never seemed to care. She was always warm to him, never making him feel like he didn't belong. The more time they spent together, the more he noticed the cracks in her polished exterior. She had her own battles, her own burdens, ones that had nothing to do with money or success. When they were alone, the walls she built around herself seemed to crumble just a little. She was just a person, struggling with her own demons just like him. One evening, after another one of their stage dinners, Sophie drove Jack back to the clinic where his test results were due. The air was thick with tension, the silence between them comfortable but heavy. Sophie broke it first. "You're not what I expected," she said, glancing at him out of the corner of her eye. "I thought you'd be more fake, more like everyone else who comes into my world." Jack smiled faintly, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. "Guess I'm not much of an actor." Sophie chuckled. "No, you're not, but that's kind of refreshing." She paused, her grip on the steering wheel tightening. "You've got this honesty about you. You're not afraid to show when you're struggling. I kind of admire that." Jack shifted in his seat, uncomfortable with the compliment. He didn't feel admirable. He felt like a man lost in his own life, struggling to stay afloat. But Sophie didn't seem to notice the turmoil in his chest. She just kept driving, her focus on the road. As they reached the clinic, Jack's anxiety crept back in, the familiar knot in his stomach growing tighter. The test results were still fresh in his mind, his heart hammering in his chest. "I'll be fine," Jack muttered more to himself than to Sophie. "It's just a test." Sophie turned to him, her expression unreadable. "You don't have to pretend with me, Jack," she said softly. "You've got a lot more on your plate than you're letting on, and you're not fooling anyone with that smile." For a moment, Jack couldn't speak. He had gotten used to hiding everything beneath a thin layer of sarcasm and forced smiles, but Sophie saw through it. She always did. "I didn't ask for any of this." He finally admitted, the words slipping out before he could stop them. "I didn't ask for this deal, for any of it. But here I am, pretending to be someone I'm not, for you." Sophie's gaze softened. "You're not pretending, Jack. You're just playing a role. You're helping me, and I'm helping you. That's all this is." But Jack knew it wasn't that simple. Nothing ever was. As they sat there, the weight of the moment settled over him. He didn't know what Sophie's life was really like, but he could tell that pretending was just as exhausting for her as it was for him. "Just remember, I'm still me," Jack said, his voice rough. Whatever this is, it's just temporary. And when it's over, I'm going back to my life." Sophie didn't respond at first. She just looked at him, her eyes searching, almost as if she was looking for something he wasn't sure he could give. "We all go back to our lives," she said quietly, "but sometimes it's nice to have someone else to go back to." And for the first time, Jack thought maybe, just maybe, Sophie wasn't as invincible as she seemed. As the days passed, Jack found himself slipping into a strange routine with Sophie. The moments when they were alone, away from the eyes of the world, were the ones that lingered with him the longest. Sophie wasn't just a CEO with a public image to maintain. She was someone real, someone who fought her own battles, just like him. One evening, after another carefully orchestrated date at a high-end restaurant, Jack couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Sophie had been quieter than usual, her smiles more forced, her eyes distant. She didn't ask about his test results that evening, didn't try to fill the silence with the usual playful banter. It was as if the weight of their arrangement was starting to crack both of them, slowly but surely. They were sitting in her luxury car, parked by the riverbank, the glow of the city lights reflected in the water. Jack stared out of the window, his fingers tracing the edge of his seat. "Sophie," he said, his voice breaking the quiet tension. "Why are you doing this? Why me?" Sophie's grip on the steering wheel tightened, her knuckles going white. She didn't answer immediately, and Jack could feel the vulnerability in the air. Finally she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "I told you," she said softly. "I need this, and maybe I just needed someone to see me for who I am, not for what I have." She turned to look at him, her eyes filled with something Jack couldn't quite place. "I don't know if you understand, but I'm tired, Jack. Tired of pretending." The honesty in her voice made something inside him crack. Maybe they weren't so different after all. Jack didn't know how to respond. The words Sophie had just spoken hung in the air between them, thick and heavy. Tired of pretending. He couldn't imagine what it must be like to live your life in the spotlight, always aware that people were watching, expecting something from you. But as he sat there, the weight of her confession pressing against him, he realized just how much he understood her struggle. "I'm not pretending," Jack said quietly, his voice steady despite the turmoil inside him. "I can't. I don't know how." Sophie let out a shaky breath, her eyes never leaving his. There was a rawness in her gaze, something that made Jack want to reach out, but he didn't know how to bridge the gap that had formed between them. They were both hiding something, and maybe that was why they had found each other in this strange arrangement. "You don't have to pretend," Sophie murmured, her voice breaking slightly. "Not with me, Jack. I don't need you to be anyone else. Just be here. For once, I want someone who's not pretending to be something they're not." Jack's heart twisted. He wanted to reach out, to tell her everything, the fear that had consumed him for months, the uncertainty of what the doctor's test results would reveal, the constant pressure to keep going, to hold it all together for Leo. But how could he explain that to her? How could he explain that he was just as lost as she was? "You're not alone," Jack said finally, his voice low but sure. "You don't have to be alone, Sophie." For the first time since their agreement had begun, Sophie didn't smile, but her eyes softened, a small crack in her armor. "Maybe not," she whispered. "Maybe not anymore." And in that moment, Jack realized that their arrangement had become something more. Not love, not yet. But something real, something worth fighting for. The days seemed to blur together. Jack had settled into the odd rhythm of his life with Sophie, the tension between them both palpable and unspoken. They were no longer just pretending. Somewhere along the way, the lines between their roles had started to blur. Sophie wasn't just the powerful CEO, and Jack wasn't just the man playing a part. There was something else now, a shared understanding, a quiet support that neither of them had expected when they first agreed to this ridiculous arrangement. But the truth was, Jack still had his test results hanging over him like a cloud. The anxiety gnawed at him, a constant companion, reminding him that none of this could last forever. As much as he found himself growing fond of Sophie, he knew he couldn't keep pretending, not when the truth was waiting, just around the corner, threatening to undo everything. The phone call came in the middle of the afternoon, just as Jack was leaving the building where he'd been working late. He saw Sophie's name flashing on his phone, and for a moment he hesitated. She had been there for him in a way that nobody else had been in months, but this call, This call had the potential to change everything. "Jack," Sophie's voice came through, shaky but steady, as if she was trying to sound composed. The results, they came in. Jack's heart skipped a beat, and he leaned against the wall of the building, trying to steady himself. "What did they say?" There was a long pause before Sophie spoke again, the silence hanging heavily between them. It's cancer, Jack." The word hit him like a punch to the gut. For a moment, everything around him seemed to fade away, the world becoming a blur of sound and motion. Jack swallowed hard, trying to find his voice. "How bad is it?" Sophie took a deep breath. "It's early, but we need to act fast." "But Jack—" "I'll be fine," Jack said, cutting her off. The words came out harsher than he intended, but he couldn't help it. The last thing he wanted was for Sophie to pity him. The news of his diagnosis hung over Jack like an unbearable weight, each passing moment feeling heavier than the last. Sophie had promised she'd help, but Jack couldn't help the storm of emotions raging inside him. He wasn't ready for this. He wasn't ready to face the reality of what was happening to him, what was about to happen to his future, his life. But he also wasn't ready to be alone. Not like this. Sophie had become an anchor in the chaos, a source of calm in a life that felt increasingly out of control. She had been the one person who hadn't treated him like a case, a burden, or some charity project. She'd treated him like a person, like someone worth caring about. Despite everything, Jack found himself calling her that evening, unable to bear the thought of facing this alone. "Sophie," he said when she picked up, his voice strained. "I don't know what to do. I don't know how to handle this." She was quiet for a long moment, and Jack could hear the faint hum of a distant conversation in the background. But then, she was right there with him, her voice soft but unwavering. "You don't have to do anything alone," she said gently. "I'm here. Whatever this is, we're in it together, Jack." Her words, simple as they were, grounded him. He had been so wrapped up in his own fear, his own uncertainty, that he hadn't stopped to think about what this was, what they were. "I don't know what this means for us," Jack admitted, feeling vulnerable in a way he hadn't in a long time. "I'm not asking for anything, Sophie. I don't even know if I can give you anything." But Sophie didn't hesitate. "You don't have to give me anything, Jack. You've already given me something, more than you realize. We'll figure this out, one step at a time." In that moment, Jack realized something that had been so elusive for so long. They weren't pretending anymore, not with each other. This was real, all of it, the fear, the connection, the bond they were forming. And maybe, just maybe, it was enough. Jack sat in his small apartment, staring out the window at the city lights, twinkling in the distance. It was late, and Leo was already asleep, his small figure curled up in bed as Jack's heart swelled with a mixture of love and worry. It was hard to reconcile everything that had happened in the past few weeks. His life had turned upside down, and yet somehow it felt like it was slowly starting to make sense. Sophie had been by his side through everything. She'd gone with him to his doctor's appointments, sat with him in silence when words weren't enough. She had insisted on being there, not because she was obligated, but because she cared. And in return, Jack had stopped hiding from his own emotions, stopped pretending to be the strong, invincible man he had always thought he had to be. It wasn't just about the cancer anymore. It was about everything that had led him to this point. The struggles he had faced, the choices he had made, some good, some bad, but all of them had shaped him into who he was today. And as he thought about it, he realized that maybe this was the moment he had been waiting for. Not the diagnosis, but the realization that his life wasn't over. That despite the weight of his illness, there was still a chance for redemption. A chance to be better, to fight, and to not do it alone. His phone buzzed on the table, and he glanced down to see a message from Sophie. "We're in this together, Jack. And no matter what happens, you got someone who believes in you. I've got your back." Jack smiled to himself, feeling a warmth spread through him. She had been his anchor, and for the first time in a long time, he realized that he wasn't just pretending anymore. This wasn't some temporary role they were playing, it was real. She was real. And for the first time in ages, Jack felt like he was ready to fight, ready to live. The phone buzzed again, and this time, it was Leo's text, the one he always sent before bed. "Good night, Dad. I love you. You're the best." Jack's throat tightened, and for a moment he had to close his eyes to stop the tears from falling. He had promised Leo so many things, and now, more than ever, he was determined to keep that promise, not just to survive, but to live. To be there for Leo in every way possible. As Jack sat there, his thoughts consumed with everything he had to face, he felt a sense of clarity wash over him. His life, though uncertain, wasn't defined by what he feared. It wasn't defined by illness or by pretending. It was defined by the people who loved him, by the moments of vulnerability that had brought him closer to them, and by the strength he never knew he had. Sophie's voice echoed in his mind, "We'll figure this out, one step at a time." And for the first time in his life, Jack believed her. He didn't need to have all the answers. He didn't need to fix everything. All he needed to do was take that first step, to allow himself to be loved, to be cared for, and to care for those who mattered most. As the night stretched on, Jack knew that the road ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be more tests, more uncertainty, more fears to face. But for the first time in a long time, he wasn't alone, and that made all the difference. Sometimes we get caught up in trying to pretend we have everything under control, when in reality, we all have our struggles. But when we allow ourselves to be vulnerable, to lean on the people who truly care about us, we find strength in the most unexpected places. This story teaches us that it's okay to not have everything figured out, to ask for help, and to embrace the support of others. Life is not about pretending. It's about living honestly with those who believe in us and who help us become the best version of ourselves